I live on the south side of Norman, Oklahoma, in a low, stubborn ranch that leans a little toward the street like it's listening for trouble. From the driveway I can see our water tower and, past it, horizon that makes you religious about the sky even if you aren't religious about anything else. I'm 41, divorced, a journeyman lineman for the electric co-op, which means on good days I replace tired transformers and on bad nights I argue with wind. My son, Caleb, is 10, all elbows and questions. He's here Wednesdays and every other weekend. He sleeps with a baseball under his pillow like luck could be shaped. People imagine tornadoes the way movies teach them to. Black funnels marching down Maine. Mostly, living here is waiting. You watch dew points and outflow boundaries and say sentences in the grocery line like, if the cap breaks, we're cooked. The day the sky turned green, the first spent the morning swapping a cracked crossarm south of the river. The wind had been shifty and impolite. My NOAA radio kept clearing its throat. By mid-afternoon, radar looked like someone had spilled paint in mean colors. The weather guy's voice, steady, caffeinated, started using words he keeps in a locked drawer. PDS, violent rotation, take shelter now. At 6:11 p.m., sirens wound up, older than anybody wants to admit, mournful as a church organ with a job. When they cry, the neighborhood becomes one organism. Doors slam, kids get counted. Somebody swears they left the rake on the porch as if rakes attract wind. I pulled the mattress off Caleb's bed and dragged it toward the hall. Our safe spot is the interior bathroom, no window, towels for helmets, a weather radio I test on the first of every month like a smoke detector with opinions. Helmet, I said. He put his bike helmet on backward and grinned. I fixed the strap with hands that pretended they weren't shaking. The power didn't die with drama. It just clicked away. A pop behind the refrigerator, and then a silence that felt like a held breath. The radio said, tornado emergency, which is the siren inside the siren. Tub, I said, and we climbed in like we were boarding a boat we didn't want. I pulled the mattress over us and worked hard not to do the thing where fear bends all your sentences into questions. Pressure changed, the way a hallway feels when someone big passes, the way your ears try to explain an elevator to your brain. Outside, something heavy thumped and dragged. Nails complained in a language I didn't want to translate. I have been under a mattress with my kid before. It's never heroic. It's paperwork for God. The radio squealed and clicked and tried to be brave. I counted breaths I couldn't control. The freight train sound arrived, every cliché true, and then the popping of lumber like knuckles cracked by a giant. Dad, Caleb said very calmly. I'm here, I said, which is the sentence that matters and the hardest one to keep true. Past fast, the way fast can also be forever. The silence afterward rang like a bell. I shoved the mattress aside. The hallway glittered with what used to be glass. The front room had slid 2 inches toward the street. In the kitchen, the window over the sink was gone and the curtain reached for Texas. We stepped barefoot onto towels because my brain still had enough electricity for rules. The air smelled like cedar, insulation, and wet dirt, like a house telling on itself. Outside, the neighborhood made its after sound. Car alarms, someone shouting a name, a dog deciding whether to be brave. Mr. Harlan, the retired band director across the way, stood in socks holding his trumpet case and kept saying, well, like a man grading a test nobody studied for. 2 doors down, a roof had decided it preferred the vacant lot. I told Caleb to sit on the porch with the cat carrier and count to 100 and then start again. Old habit, new emergency. I scanned for lines. On the corner, a pole had snapped like a match. One phase lay draped across a pickup like a snake after dinner. I yelled because yelling is a tool, and a teenager too young for a skateboard backed away fast. Somewhere a crying sound braided itself through the noise and tugged on my spine. I called it in. My crew would be ours. Trees on south feeders, a blown sub east of the highway. So I did what men in hard hats are trained to do. Kept people honest around the wire, knocked on doors with the back of my knuckles, said names, asked for head counts. When a fire engine turned onto our street, the firefighter who hopped down had the tired eyes of someone already earning a story he didn't want. Keep folks back from that phase till your guys arrive? He asked. I can keep them honest, I said. Caleb, on the porch, held the cat carrier like a life jacket. The firefighter tossed him kid-sized safety glasses, souvenir of a terrible night, and my throat did that humiliating gratitude thing. When it got too dark to pretend we weren't scared, we went back inside and slept in the hallway like refugees from our own rooms. The mattress felt heavier when fear was done using it. In the half-sleep that comes after sirens, I thought stupidly about how I'd meant to fix the sticky bathroom door and how sometimes the world fixes things by removing them altogether. We breathed. We tried. We let the wind finish its sentence. Morning turned destruction into inventory. Sunlight found all the places the roof no longer covered and made accusatory rectangles on floors that had never been that honest. The east wall wore a new diagonal crack like a lightning scar. The fence leaned into the neighbor's yard. Conversational. We ate granola bars and called them pancakes. I texted my ex to say we were okay. She texted back a heart and bring him here if power's out by noon. The street looked like a game board somebody lost patience with. Trash cans tipped, shingles like playing cards. A trampoline folded around a tree like an embarrassed spider. Strangers became neighbors in 30 seconds. Miss Tina from the corner handed out bottled water like sacraments, and the kid I'd yelled at last night showed up with work gloves and the look of someone who needed to prove his hands could do better things. We started a pile at the curb, limbs, insulation, a cabinet door I recognized even though it had lost its memory. The co-op radio asked for volunteers to clear lines. I kissed Caleb's helmet and took him to his mom's. On the way back, I stopped at my buddy Cole's because lightning had a habit of finding him. He was already in his truck, coffee in a thermos big enough to baptize a horse. "You good?" he asked. "Define good," I said. He laughed the way men laugh when the other option is a noise that scares people. Emergency work has a choreography you don't have to think about if you've done it long enough. Flag the street. Ground the line. Check the backfeed because somebody is always running a generator wrong. Bolt new crossarm. Lift with the bucket into a sky that looks calm because the worst thing already happened. We set 3 new poles before lunch, which we ate sitting on the tailgate while an old dog performed quality control. "I keep thinking about Joplin," Cole said, "the way you name another disaster when you need a reference point for your own." I nodded, mouth full of peanut butter, because sometimes the only theology I have is sandwiches. That afternoon, on 89th, we came around a stand of hacked-up hackberry and saw a line sagging into a standing water sheen. Cole hopped out and waved slow, that wide, careful wave linemen do when they want the world to stop moving. "Back the truck," he shouted. I did. Then the pop, small, like a light bulb dying close to your ear, and then the big one, like a god clearing his throat. The world went white. When it settled back into colors, Cole was on the ground. They teach you about step potential in class. Lightning and lines make the ground a map of invisible circles, and if your feet are in 2 different circles when a fault finds Earth, you become part of the equation. You're supposed to shuffle heel to toe like you're dancing with a ghost. Cole knew that. I know he knew that. His hands were open, palms up, like the last thing he tried to do was make a stop sign out of skin. I screamed his name until it stopped being a word. The neighbor with the old dog ran out. He had a towel and prayers. I had gloves and a mouth that didn't work. CPR is a miracle you are only ever half sure you're allowed to perform. I counted, I breathed. I begged a series of bargains nobody could honor. When the ambulance took him, I sat on the curb and noticed stupid things. The way the grass around the arcing point had boiled. The smell that lives somewhere between copper and lightning. My hands shaking in precise tremors like a cheap motor. They told me later about the arrhythmia and the ride where they lost him and found him and lost him again. His wife texted me that night. A heart, a broken heart, and he's gone. I threw up into the sink like my body was choosing a language. In the days that came next, insurance became a sport I hadn't trained for. My own house had moved from maybe cosmetic to structural by the time the inspector with the laser level was done listing what couldn't be coaxed back into square. A man in a polo said act of God like a shrug. I wanted to tell him God had been busy elsewhere. I patched the roof with a tarp the color of false hope and slept at my ex's because Caleb needed the predictable hum of her air conditioner and because I wanted to wake up a place where walls met at 90 degrees. Cole's funeral was on a Wednesday, hot enough to be rude. The Union Hall brought flags and a bell. His boys wore little suit pants like they were being punished. I once believed grief arrived as one big thing, like the storm. It turns out to be 1,000 small ones. The extra coffee you brew by accident, the socket set you reach for and then don't, the way you start to say a name before your throat remembers. Back at work, a supervisor said, "Take time if you need it," which is the thing supervisors say when they can't give you what you actually need. I went back on a truck because routine is a leash. At night, sirens in the distance made my shoulders rise like a tent, and I could taste electricity on my tongue when I lay down. The kind of phantom that doesn't care what room you're sleeping in. Caleb started keeping his helmet under his bed like a superstition. Once, when thunder cracked wrong, he crawled into my lap even though he's too long to fit there. "Is the sky mad?" he asked. "No," I said. "The sky is just big." He nodded like he would write that down later, and I tucked my face into his hair and counted breaths again. It's a habit I don't plan to break. You don't rebuild from a tornado so much as rehearse living until the rehearsal starts to look like a show. The first month was tarps and contractor bags and a city of pickup trucks moving on the same tired grid. My house lost its porch in a mercy killing by the adjuster. The east wall learned a new angle. I moved my stuff into a storage unit that smelled like old rubber bands and promises. Then I moved myself into a rental that had been built during that weird boom when people thought beige could fix feelings. I kept working storms because it felt wrong not to, and then I realized my ladders lead back to the corners where coal wasn't. So I asked for days. I needed to find out if I could be a person who wasn't only a tool attached to a bucket. I signed up for CERT, Community Emergency Response Training, on a flyer taped to the library door. Tuesday nights in a room that smelled like coffee and dry erase. I learned to triage, to listen, to use a pry bar without turning it into a weapon. A retired fire captain named Baird taught us to say names, not sir or ma'am, and to tap on doors 3 times and then once more for luck. "People don't need heroes at midnight," he said. "They need a plan and a voice that doesn't shake." My voice still shook. I kept showing up. Caleb and I built a storm kit. He made a list. Radio, headlamps, batteries, Uno, the cat's carrier, a picture of him with pizza grease on his cheek that his mother says is not suitable for framing. He put his bike helmet by the bathroom door and made me promise we'd test the radio every month. We did. My ex and I stopped arguing about whether I'm too cautious, which is how you can tell you've scared each other the same amount. Insurance took its time the way molasses makes a point. My contractor, a man named Ray with a tape measure that looked like a sword, told me the wall could be braced and the roof could be honest again. We talked about safe rooms, concrete closet, steel door, bolts that go through the slab into earth. I said yes, even though the number made me swallow twice. "I'll put it where your hall bathroom was," he said, like mapping a scar. I nodded because I wanted a place where my knowing would have somewhere to sit. Therapy entered my vocabulary by stealth. The co-op had a counselor come in and say reasonable things in a room with chairs that tried to be comfortable. I went because they brought donuts. I stayed because she said, "Trauma is your body doing math too fast." She taught me to name the surge before it dominates the room. Electricity, pressure, the smell of wet pine, the exact pitch of the siren. "If you can notice, you can breathe," she said. "If you can breathe, you can choose." I hate that it's true. I'm grateful it's true. In July, we took a trip to the lake with my sister's family because that's what people who have insurance meetings do to remind themselves water has other modes. The boys cannonballed until their stomachs figured out gravity. In the evening, lightning spidered the far horizon like a rumor. Caleb looked at me without moving his head. "Just heat lightning," I said, lying on purpose. He nodded like a kid who gifts you the grace of believing you anyway. I kept seeing coal in corners, which is a way of saying I refused to let him leave. On a Tuesday when the sky behaved, I drove to the substation where we'd shared a thermos last winter and sat on the concrete block where we talked about whether his oldest would choose baseball or drums. I said his name out loud and told him what the boys were up to. I told him I hated the way the world keeps collecting washers and T-posts and then pretends a man is harder to misplace. I told him I would keep teaching apprentices to shuffle, heel to toe, like they were dancing with a ghost, and that if anyone rolled their eyes I would remind them of him. By August, the safe room had a door you could trust. We painted it the color of a sensible storm cloud. Caleb stuck glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and claimed the bottom shelf for Uno and granola bars. I stood inside it one night, door closed, alone, and timed my breath to the sound of the air return. I do not believe in magic. I believe in steel and bolts and choices you make while the lights are still on. A year later, when the first fall front dragged summer off like a bouncer escorting a drunk, the sky went that green again. You can't photograph it right, you have to be under it. The sirens started their sermon. Phones woke up and screamed. My radio said the words he keeps in that drawer. I opened the front door and hollered names. The new neighbor, the one who always parks crooked, answered with a baby on her hip and fear that made her eyes huge. "Safe room," I said, tapping my chest like a scout's oath. "Bring the diaper bag." She nodded and then stood very still, the way people do when their body is choosing which way to run. I did the rounds the cert way, 3 hard knocks, step back, say the name the class had taught. Mr. Harlan's socks were on the wrong feet. "We're rehearsed," I told him, and he patted his trumpet case like a Bible. The teenager I'd yelled at that first night now had a little brother clinging to his knee. He carried the cat carrier like a pro. I learned everybody's shoe collection by their door. I learned everyone's middle names. Inside the safe room, we made a crowd. Caleb sat cross-legged, very official, with the radio in his lap. The baby cried once and then decided we were warm enough to forgive. I shut the heavy door and felt the hinge argue and then agree. My ex texted, "We're in the closet." "You? Room," I wrote. Stars glowing. She sent the eye-roll emoji and then a heart. The radio popped and howled and tried to speak through static. The house made those low, tired ship noises. Pressure changed. The hard part of the storm shouldered past in 2 minutes that took 10. When we opened the door, the world looked like itself except for the map of leaves on the driveway where the wind had tried to explain art to my oak. The neighbor cried in that relieved way that releases more than just the last 10 minutes. I handed her water and said her name again because sometimes you need to hear yourself exist. Out on the street, a siren argued its way towards somewhere that wasn't us. I counted utility poles without meaning to and texted my supervisor I could go in if they needed me. He said they did and then told me to take my time. I said time was already taking me. We didn't lose anyone that night. The line crews worked until breakfast in that quiet, ballet way you can only see when you know where to watch. I replaced a fuse on a branch line behind a church while bats finished whatever bats do at dawn. I drove home with grit in my teeth and thought about the safe room stars and how Caleb had organized the granola bars by flavor like a tiny quartermaster. When I got there, he was asleep on the couch in a full sweatshirt like he'd lost an argument with weather. I put a sheet over him and stood in the doorway watching him grow the way you watch lightning far away, aware of distance and speed and the way you can't keep anything from being itself. The contractor finished the last honest part of the house in October. Walls met where they were supposed to. The hall was straighter than I'd ever seen it. We framed Cole's Union patch in the safe room because memory deserves metal and anchors. The teenager from 2 doors down asked if he could ride with me sometime to see how the bucket works. I said maybe, and then I said yes if his mother said yes and he wore the right boots and learned the shuffle. He rolled his eyes in perfect teenage and then looked scared when I told him why. We stood there, 2 people separated by a storm and a year, and I told him the truth in small sentences. He said okay in a voice that understood the cost of the word. I don't have a moral. I have a list. Put shoes by the door. Hang on to the radio. Say names out loud. Paint the safe room a color you can live with. Teach the shuffle to anyone who will listen. Admit you're scared and keep the bolt cutters by the water heater anyway. When the sky turns green, the first still taste electricity. When sirens cry, I still feel my shoulders become a tent. I still think about the impossible map of circles around a fault and about how we're all always standing in 2 different ones. The circle where something terrible happened and the circle where we learned how to keep our hands moving. I'm a man in Oklahoma with a lineman's back and a kid who organizes granola and a door that won't lie to me in a storm. The safe room stars are glowing right now because Caleb forgot to turn the light off before he closed the door. That's fine. They belong to the dark. When the sky speaks again, we'll listen. We'll count breaths. We'll let the wind finish its sentence and then we'll open the door and get back to work.